Alright, hello and welcome to You Were Saying. My name is Mike Powell.
And I'm Mike Vasquez. Today's topic is superhero movies.
So Mike, I think I'm actually starting to miss this summer.
Yeah, summer's a pretty good season. You know, a lot of people, they go for autumn. You know, they don't call it fall. They have to be a little pretentious and call it autumn. But I think summer's underrated, you know? It's beautiful and sunny, and it doesn't, you know, affect my seasonal affective disorder. So that's
to be fair, I wouldn't hate on the really beautiful autumnal seasonal changes that happen in fall. But what I really miss about summer, and I think you can agree, are the really terrible, horrendous, despicable summer blockbusters that happen every single summer.
So, like, by despicable, are you talking about Despicable Me 2? Because that came out last summer.
I didn't like the first Despicable Me, so I didn't actually check out the second one.
Yeah, me either. And, you know, and plus it's a kid's movie. You don't want to be the 20-something-year-old going there by himself during, like, a Sunday matinee. It's uncomfortable for everyone.
What's really interesting that you bring up 20-year-olds and empty movie theaters is that seems to be the biggest market for a very particular kind of summer blockbuster that's been happening recently.
I think I see where you're going with this, Mike.
Superhero epic.
Yes.
Has exploded in the last, I don't know, what was it, 10 years or so?
Yeah, about 10 years, maybe between 10 to 15. Yeah, I'd say 10.
I'd say 10 because
sure.
Personally, I would say that the very first large example of this genre was the Raimi's Spider-Man, which if I remember correctly was in 2002.
Yeah, 2001, 2002. Let's not split hairs over when the first Spider-Man came out. You know, no one's concerned about that. And besides, the second one was the best in the series anyways. Yeah. It goes without saying.
It starts off the journey of these movies in 2002, I guess you could say.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I would go with Raimi's Spider-Man or possibly Singer's X-Men. Yeah, those are pretty much the genesis of the modern superhero era as we know it. And they're both very good movies. So I think when you came up with that introduction, basically blasting these movies, you really should have said, like, you know, let's be specific. We're saying that the really modern ones, we're talking about a specific sort of era.
A very specific kind of genre, a very specific era, yeah.
Yeah, which we'll get into. Yeah, but these are quality films.
I remember there was a couple in that little stretch in that very late 2000, early 2000, late 90s, where we had a couple comic book movies come out of nowhere, sort of, and really take everyone, even people who weren't really comic book fans, take all of them, I wouldn't say by storm, because that's a cliche, and I try not to use cliches, but they were popular for what they were.
I mean, if you're talking about the X-Men movie, if you said by storm, that'd be like a good sort of pun.
Mike, if I ever use a pun, let me know, and I'll be sure to see myself off a bridge somewhere.
Is that going to be like how we differentiate ourselves as hosts? I'm going to be the guy who makes puns? Will you give me like podcast points every time I make a pun?
Probably negative podcast points, yeah.
As long as we're using the phrase podcast points, then I think that we're going to be okay.
Can you make a thing about podcast points from puns?
I'll make a scorecard. I'll make like a PowerPoint presentation.
Because I just like alliteration.
Oh sure, yeah, you live for that crap. Yeah.
Actually, I'm talking about a couple of movies from that period. There was Blade 1.
And you and I have discussed Blade before, and
which, you know, is one of my favorite, probably my most favorite comic book movie franchise. I liked it a lot. Yeah, the second one holds a very special place in my heart.
Yeah, well, Del Toro directed the second one. He's a great director.
Interestingly enough,
I didn't realize it was your
about Del Toro is that he also did another superhero movie that was a little later. I don't know the date for it. Hellboy, and
I think that was like 2004. Yeah,
that one, similar to Blade, didn't really get the same kind of response that the other ones got. It didn't make a second one, which is pretty awesome, but
Can I tell you a quick story about the second Hellboy
Please.
film? I actually, when that came out, I took a girl out that I went to high school with on a date to see that movie, and I don't want to say anything about I'm not speaking about the quality of the movie or anything. I'm not making any assumptions. I'm not making any judgments about Hellboy 2 as a film. I will just say that after that night, she did not speak to me anymore. So, yeah.
Now,
is that Del Toro's fault, or I don't know.
I don't want to speak
Who's
to your
say?
character.
Probably, yeah. Well, I mean,
I question how much of that is on Del Toro, because I saw Hellboy 2 and I saw Hellboy 1, and those were really fun movies, which I don't think came out during the summer. So I don't know if you'd be able to call them summer blockbusters, would you?
I don't remember what season it came out in. I just remember specifically that person no longer talking to me after I saw that movie.
Came out in April.
So
April 2004. So not really.
Oh, so it's like a spring That's horrible. It's like the start of the summer movie season. No one remembers those movies.
Exactly. That's why I didn't really do that well.
3 months later, yeah.
Okay. But it was able to get a sequel, so it counts for something. But so some of those movies kind of came out like Blade, and I'm gonna go with X-Men. Those really early ones.
Yeah.
And showed people that you could take a character from this kind of criticized medium, comic books, for some people, and make it into a mainstream product that people would really respond well to.
Yeah, sure. And I think especially the latter two, Spider-Man and X-Men, because Blade is a rated R franchise, so that really limits the audience, and they are really good films. Not so much Trinity, but we're not going to get into that today. This is not a podcast dedicated to Blade Trinity. Let's establish that right now.
Patton Oswalt's in it, though. I never have actually seen it because of my disdain for most of the actors. But I heard Patton Oswalt's kind of good in a.
No, he's kind. I mean, yeah, he's a nerd.
In a kind of Patton Oswalt-y, useless character kind of way.
Well, sure, most of the characters are pretty useless.
Well, not Blade.
Yeah, I don't understand why that's your favorite franchise, but that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about the superhero genre as a whole.
Like, I could talk about Blade for a very long time.
And I keep telling you, this is not a Blade podcast. We're going to really limit our appeal if we stick to just talking about Wesley Snipes.
About those movies, those really early movies, they seem to have actually a different formula, if you go back and watch them, than the kind of more modern take on the superhero genre that the movies in the last, I don't know, what we say, 4 or 5 years have had.
Sure, I would say since maybe like 2005, since like, Nolan's Batman. I think that sort of marks a new sort of era in the superhero genre.
Yeah, I feel like that era started with the first Batman and maybe the first Iron Man,
which I think was like 2007 or 2008 maybe. One of the two. Yeah.
Sounds about right. I mean, there is a service online that you can kind of use in order to find this. It's pretty easy. Iron Man's.
Are you talking about Ask Jeeves? Should I ask Jeeves about that?
I'm talking about Yahoo Answers. That's where I go for most of my questions. Yeah.
That explains a lot of the things you say that you present as fact. If Yahoo Answers told you that.
It's crowdsourcing my life dilemmas. So yeah, Iron Man was in 2008. That first Batman was probably in 2000.
It was 05. It was 05. I'm betting a quarter on it. Okay.
Not really close, but close enough. But there seems to be a difference between those two kind of movies. Those first few Spider-Man movies and the first two X-Men movies felt like a really kind of different formula than the later ones.
Now I'd like you to expand on that because you say that, and that's not something that I thought of originally, but I can kind of think of reasons why that's the case, but I'm wondering what you were thinking of when you say that.
I remember that the Iron Man movies, for example, because I feel like that is the biggest, which is really funny. If you go in the comics and look at the character, the Iron Man films are really the largest comic filmic entity that they have, is the Iron Man character.
Yeah, they're the most popular. It's the most popular franchise.
Yeah. Because it was out first, maybe, I don't know. But for those movies, they didn't really do much in terms of using the comic universe.
But you know what? In this case, I think with Iron Man, I think that works because isn't Iron Man kind of like a B-level Marvel hero? Kind of has a crappy rogues
He
gallery.
is a original Avenger, which stands for something, but no, he's not a very likable character in the comics at all. He's like a womanizer, drunk, asshole, pretty much. But they didn't use that, which is smart, obviously. But they didn't use that, which in the first couple of the original Spider-Man and X-Men, I feel like tried to ground those films in the comic universe that they were playing from.
Sure, I mean, there's a certain level of camp. There's a certain camp factor, especially in the Spider-Man
Definitely.
films. But you know what? I think that works really well because I'm not really a fan of camp in general. But when it comes to Spider-Man, here's a teenage kid in tights who's, slinging himself around New York City and Manhattan, solving crimes,
Solving crimes.
cracking
He doesn't solve any
wise.
crimes.
He doesn't solve. I mean, he doesn't
stops
solve them.
crime, Mike.
He stops. He after the fact, he stops the criminals after they've committed their crimes,
Yeah.
and he cracks wise.
I'm not
while
saying
doing
one's
it. So,
better
yeah.
than the other necessarily in how they portray the comic. I'm just saying that there are particular thematic elements that Spider-Man and X-Men, I'm harping on those because I feel like those are the biggest ones from that era, used to really garner a lot of praise, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, if we're thinking about that era, the only other films I can think of are like the Punisher movies, and we're not going to
Yeah,
get into those.
I know a couple of
Yeah.
people who saw those, and those aren't people who I really like to associate with.
That's a good
They're
call
scary.
in this
They frighten
case.
me a little bit.
They want their rated R comic book action, Mike. Okay, and they don't care if it's direct to DVD either.
I feel like they made 3 or 4 different Punisher movies that were all like not even the same actor or plot or anything. They were just like standalone, random ass movies.
Yeah, I think they were. And again, we keep deviating by like talking about this rated R comic book. Like, this is not what we came here to talk about. We came in with a very specific goal in mind, so I keep deviating from that. I'm sorry. Let's get back.
Let's get back to comic book movies. Let's try to
Yeah.
find a way back.
Ones that people watched.
What did people watch? That's actually an interesting question because it seems like more people watched the really big blockbuster films than some of the smaller superhero films.
Sure, and I think we're definitely seeing a trend
Yeah.
where now every
Superhero movie is
superhero
huge.
film has the same layout. Yeah. And I'm thinking about that, and I think one good example is if you go back 10 years ago, when Ang Lee's Hulk came
Yeah.
out. And that's a great example because they rebooted that franchise 5 years
Yep.
later because it didn't fit that mold and audiences didn't care for it.
Yeah, Alien's Hulk, if I remember correctly, was a little bit more, I'm not going to say psychological, because I don't know how good of a term that would be for a comic book movie, but it was a little bit more introspective, I think.
Yeah,
From what I remember.
and that's and I think we have to give Ang Lee a lot of credit for that, and it's become sort of a cult classic because of
Yeah.
that. Because and you know what? Have you seen both of the Hulk films?
I saw the one with Norton,
yeah,
and
and Tim Roth.
yeah,
Yeah,
but I didn't see all of Ang Lee's. I've just kind of experienced it, not really seen it, I guess, if that makes sense. I've just seen, like,
oh, okay.
read about it and
Kind
seen, clips and stuff.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and Norton's Hulk, it's a fun time.
Yeah.
But it's incredibly dumb.
Yeah, what I've seen is the recent kind of blockbuster epics that have happened have decided that what they're going to do is take the kind of worst aspects of comic books, all the things that people kind of criticize about them, and just turn that into a huge ass movie.
And they become box office
And they become
gold.
hits, really,
So-
really huge hits.
So it's interesting that you say that these are the traits about comics that are despised, and yet, Avengers is $1 billion movie.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Iron Man 3 is $1 billion movie. The Dark Knight Returns, Rises, whatever. The last
Dark
one,
Knight
Rises.
which
Sure,
is interesting.
yeah.
I think we should get into it.
$1 billion movie.
What's funny about The Dark Knight Rises is that it began that series kind of closer to the, I guess, Ang Lee mode of storytelling, where the characters were a little bit more refined, had a little bit more depth to them. Whereas in Rises, they kind of lose most of what makes them interesting.
Well, I mean, that's one of the many problems of the film is
There's a
that
lot of problems with Rises, unfortunately. Yeah,
there are too many for we're talking about too many movies to get into all the problems in The Dark Knight Rises. But one of the problems is that there are too many
a lot of
characters thrown
characters.
around, and you don't devote enough time to any one. Except for Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character, for reasons that I still don't understand, because he's not a very compelling character.
He is. He's Dick Grayson, Mike.
Well, he's not though. His name's Robin.
Don't you remember
So
at the end?
yeah, I remember that was a kick in the teeth, is what it was. It's horrible. It's a little joke for the audience. Oh
I
God.
think a good thing to get into is how those movies differ. Because for me personally, the big epic blockbusters really seem to do a harmful disservice to this medium I really, really appreciate and enjoy in comic books by stripping them of everything that makes them interesting. The art, the subtle nuances in storytelling, all of that is just kind of done away with in those recent Marvel films like Avengers and the mighty Thor.
Thor. Every time you and I talk about these summer blockbusters, Thor always comes up as like the example of the worst of these films.
It's not a very
It,
good
it
one.
just no, it fails in sort of every respect. And you're talking about stripping away the traits of comic books, that make the great ones great, like the art and the story and stuff like that. And Thor is just sort of an example of where,
Where
the
it
art
goes wrong, yeah.
direction, the cinematography, everything is just so bland.
Yeah. Like Thor on his own is kind of a bland character. I mean, people have tried to make him interesting by playing with his I don't know, juxtaposition between him being a god and him being living on Earth, sort of. But in the Thor filmic version, which I of course have not seen, but have read enough about to know exactly what I'm talking about, he's an alien, right?
Sure, yeah.
Which completely does away with the one thing that makes him interesting.
Well, I think aliens are interesting. E.T.
E.T. is
He was
interesting.
interesting.
E.T. is really interesting.
J.J. Abrams likes aliens. Super 8 or Cloverfield, whatever that
I think
thing is.
those
What
were
was that thing?
monsters, Mike.
Oh, Jesus, what's the difference, man? Don't even get started with me on that. Listen, I did see Thor, and this is a case where it sort of exemplifies all the bad traits of sort of this Marvel Cinematic Universe, as they call
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Because for those who don't know, Marvel and Disney now have
Right.
the rights to a lot of these Marvel franchises. Not Spider-Man, that's still held by Sony, and X-Men is still held by Fox, but, Thor, Iron Man, whatever Scarlett Johansson was, S.H.I.E.L.D., all that crap.
Scarlett Johansson was Black Widow, even though she was never called that, but fair enough.
Thor sort of exemplifies all the bad traits of this universe where, they all take...
Yeah, what are some
Yeah,
of the
I'm sorry.
what are some of the bad traits that they have? Just to, because I know,
I think
you've seen all the movies.
Yes, I have seen. I've seen all of the Marvel Cinematic movies, and I don't think I'm gonna stick around to see these second generation ones, and definitely not in theaters, because in my mind, the biggest failing of the Marvel Cinematic Universe is that every film tonally tries to be the same thing. They all sort of try to emulate Iron Man, and it really never works as well as it did in Iron Man 1. Because they all take place in the same universe, they all take place in the same,
Mythos, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is, these are different characters, they have different experiences, different enemies, different lives and backstories, and yet they all strive for the same sort of generic, cinematography and art direction. And Thor they kinda tried to break away from that, but the only way they did that was by using all these Dutch angles, which just made the film sort of nauseating to watch. Because that's something you use, and like the character in the film is unsettled or something, like it's a stylistic choice that you would use in that sort of situation, but it never makes sense in the movie, in the context of the film.
It's interesting. What I've noticed from these films, I've seen a couple of them. I haven't seen all of them because I don't feel like wasting that much time. Is that what they lack? They lack like this really particular kind of aesthetic that you get in comics, and that you get in Dark Knight, and that you get in Spider-Man. This like visual aesthetic that really kind of pulls it all together. It makes it kind of feel real. These movies feel like a comic book in the sense that they seem really just fake and generic. Like Captain America, they're in this dungeon, Nazi dungeon, and it's just like the worst set. There's like no character,
No, remember,
no setting at all.
It was a Hydra dungeon because apparently you can't have Nazis as film villains anymore.
No.
Like Nazis aren't intimidating enough, even though they are Nazis.
I think because Germany is such a powerful nation now, they kind of quelled that in Hollywood. You can't have Nazis in movies anymore.
So Hollywood conspiracy. This is the Hollywood conspiracy theory podcast.
Don't get me started on Hollywood conspiracies, Mike. We'd be here all night.
Okay, well, let's not do that. Let's save that for another night then. Yeah, no, you're totally right about the sort of art direction in these films, because one example of sort of the opposite is I think Batman Begins and
definitely.
Nolan's Batman franchise as a whole. Yeah, and we've sort of discussed this before, where Nolan clearly is a director with a vision,
an idea. Yeah,
he saw it exactly, and he knew what he wanted his Gotham to look like. You know, very dilapidated, very sort of in ruin. Very desperate for a savior, you know, and it feels like a real city.
Like a character, which is really super, super important when you're dealing with Batman, because in the comics, Gotham really is a character. At least when it's used right, it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you also get that kind of in Spider-Man a little bit, where New York City really feels like a character based on like the people in it and kind of the setting of, you know, where he is.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you compare that to any Marvel Cinematic Universe movie, and it's like, you know, Tony Stark is in generic California location.
Tony Stark's in New York, dude.
No, he's in New York now, but he was his
I didn't even know.
Yeah, no, he lives in California. He says his address in Iron Man 3, man. Come on.
I didn't see Iron Man 3, Mike.
Okay.
I checked out. I checked out on 2.
And then, especially in the Avengers, you know, they have this incredible action-packed climax in downtown Manhattan, and you really... You can't tell it's Manhattan.
Yeah.
It just seems like a big metropolis. It's like the metropolis from the Matrix movies.
That's a good point, yeah.
Yeah. Don't get me started on the Matrix movies. Now that's something I'll talk all night about. That's a good time. Those movies are a fun time.
The first one still holds up, which is really interesting because it's really old.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because it was so revolutionary. But,
yeah.
And that's sort of a superhero movie in itself, but that's not what we're here to discuss. We're here to discuss comic book movies.
It's a little bit different, yeah.
Yeah, whatever. You know, apples and oranges. Potato.
Yep. Kiwis and fruits.
Tomato.
I don't eat tomatoes.
Oh.
I don't like lycopene.
Yeah, I don't know what that is, man.
It's vitamin in tomatoes.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
I get a rash.
Oh God. We're gonna lose any listeners we had up to this point. They're gonna go away now as they envision your...
Anyways, about superheroes. I think a really interesting movie, not because it was good, but because of what it kind of failed in doing, was it Zack Snyder who directed Man of Steel?
It absolutely was. From the creator of Sucker Punch.
Did you not like Sucker Punch, Mike?
You know what? I didn't see Sucker Punch. I've seen a lot of them.
You didn't see Sucker Punch, really?
I've seen all of the movies we've talked about up until this point.
Really? Because I actually did see Sucker Punch, and
what is wrong with you?
It left me very disturbed. But that's not what we're here for. Man of Steel, I saw, which also really disturbed me because of how awkward it was.
Really?
Very awkward. The first, what was it, like 10 or 15 minutes? We were in some, like, kind of H.R. Geiger, like, surreal, futuristic alien world.
It's called Krypton, Mike.
Yeah, but...
Respect the lore.
But Krypton has never looked so, I don't know, alien-esque, if you remember that movie.
I mean, yeah, I remember movie.
Yeah.
I remember Alien.
Yeah. They had the same...
I remember movie. Yeah, no, I'm good.
The Alien movie with Sigourney Weaver.
Yeah, it's called Alien.
Yeah, if you look at that movie, and you look at the Superman movie, they have what looks to be the same artistic consultants, which is not a good thing.
Now, see, you're comparing this to Alien, and I made a very different comparison in my mind when I watched this movie. I saw it in IMAX.
Visually, yeah. But
I didn't see it in IMAX. I wanted to, and it was sold out. Whatever. The point being, when I saw that introductory sequence where Russell Crowe,
I was laughing. I was actually
oh my god,
amused.
you know what? I enjoyed it because it was like Avatar's climax condensed into 15 minutes. I thought it was wonderful. And you know why I thought it was wonderful? Because the next hour and a half of the movie was just really, really boring.
Boring, just
Clark
plodding.
Kent's wandering around and he's, pensive about his youth and blah, blah, blah. And he's doing these random acts of God and he's so mysterious and it's just so dull. Oh my God. How do you feel about the tone of the movie overall?
So, about that movie, right?
Yeah, that's what we're talking about.
I was trying to watch it. I got to the point where Clark is a kid, and he's helping people and pulling buses out of lakes and doing all kinds of stuff. And I just kind of checked out. Now I think that might be because I was in my room. I didn't have a movie theater there to kind of entertain me. It was just I didn't see the point in continuing the tale, because it was so boring.
Well, you checked out before the payoff, which is the destruction of Metropolis and thousands of innocent people.
How far into the movie is the quote unquote payoff?
God, I don't know. It's far enough into there, man. Like you could just skip the middle third of the movie and you'll be okay. Because we all know Superman's origin. Whatever. A lot of people complained about the tone of this movie, saying it's too dreary, it's too gray, it's too.
I didn't have a problem with that because I feel like that really worked in Batman, which is interesting that they try to recreate that in Superman, but
it's not interesting at all because anytime DC's tried to deviate from Batman, they have failed miserably. Do you remember Green Lantern?
No, I didn't. Never saw Green Lantern, Mike.
Yeah, I know you're a Green Lantern fan. You don't want to tarnish those memories of the
Mike,
Green Lantern.
I have very strong memories about Green Lantern.
That's nice. I saw the movie and it was not good. Okay. No, I agree. I really didn't, I feel like I'm an apologist for the Man of Steel movie because I didn't think it was the worst superhero movie
You enjoyed
ever,
it,
unlike a lot of people. I walked out of the theater and I thought like, it was okay. It was like, I'd give it like a 6 and a half.
The only problem with that, it was kind of what DC was riding on, I feel like, because Batman had just kind of fallen off. I feel like Rises was about to end or just ended right around the time that Superman came out. So they're really hoping that Superman would take off and people would be really into it, which it doesn't seem like it did.
Yeah, but people are going to eat up the sequel because they're throwing Batman back into it.
Yeah, like I don't know how that's going to work. That is not in any way, shape, or form going to be an enjoyable experience.
Clearly, yeah, it's definitely, I have no faith in that movie.
I mean, if you break it down into its parts, it has a Batman-Superman team-up, which has never worked. It has Ben Affleck as Batman. It has the same Superman actor. I just don't.
And don't forget Zack Snyder's directing again.
Really? I thought it was
Yeah.
I thought they would have tried something else.
And I think they still have Goyer writing too, and Goyer's not a very good writer.
Not in his own, no. I mean, he helps script the Batman movies because he does understand like a comic mind.
Yeah.
He understands plotting, but yeah, on his own, he just gets ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly. Because he wrote and directed, I believe, Blade Trinity. That was like his first time directing.
No way.
I think so.
Mike, I thought we made a decision in the very beginning that we would not bring up Blade Trinity.
I mean, I know we don't have a name set for this podcast yet, but can we just call it the Bladecast?
The Blade. Yeah, I'm fine with that. Yeah.
Or like Daywalkers, the podcast.
I was thinking about getting Daywalker tattooed on my body, on my person somewhere.
That's great. That'll be fun to explain to women who have no idea who Blade is.
Vampires are a very attractive race. You look at the Twilight movies. I mean, come on.
Sure, but none of the vampires in the Twilight movies, as far as I know, are angry black men. AKA Wesley Snipes.
That was the one fault with those Twilight movies, I feel like.
So you feel like it needed more Wesley Snipes?
A little bit, yeah. It would have helped. It couldn't have hurt. It couldn't have hurt, at least.
No, it couldn't have hurt, but maybe just a cameo.
Yeah.
He's just in the background of like a Blimpies or something that they're in, yeah.
He would have been like a rogue vampire that they talk about and are like scared of.
Sure, let's do a Blade Twilight crossover, because that'll get everyone in the theaters.
I'm sure there's a fanfic of it somewhere. We just have to find it.
Okay.
Anyways.
Yeah, right. How do we get on that? Do we want to talk about independent? Do we want to talk about like Dread It All or Watchmen? Because that's another Snyder.
Yeah, I didn't see Watchmen.
Oh, you didn't see Watchmen? Yeah, I don't really remember it very well. Scott, I didn't like Scott Pilgrim. God.
I mean, I feel like those movies are interesting. They're like the Watchmen's, Hellboy, Scott Pilgrim, even the X-Men First Class movies.
I liked First Class a
Yeah,
lot.
First Class was really entertaining. It worked really well. At least I thought so. But those movies came
Sure.
out, I feel like, at a very interesting time. I feel like they were trying to ride this wave of popularity that the Marvel movies kind of created, the Iron Man and Batman movies kind of created. Um, they didn't really hit an audience the way the other ones did, and I feel like that's because with Scott Pilgrim and Watchmen and X-Men First Class in particular, they stuck to the material the best, which I feel like kind of placed them in this really weird, almost sci-fi niche.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like the bigger epic movies, Rises did this more than the other two Batman movies, but they decided, we're not gonna get audiences if we stick to the material. So let's just make a huge action flick with people in tights.
Sure. Because the subset of people who have read the stories that the movie is
Yep.
based upon, like The Dark Knight Returns and Year One and all of these things, it's going to be so tiny compared to, the entire world, which is going to see this in theaters.
I mean, Nolan did a really good job of incorporating separate stories. Like he incorporated Year One, The Dark Knight Returns, probably Long Halloween a little bit into his stories, but didn't just make a movie about Year One, which I think was really smart on his part.
But I wouldn't have complained if he did. I love Year One.
Year One's good. I don't like it as much as Dark Knight Returns, but
Dark Knight Returns needed to be different than the book. Like, it needed to be adapted, and stripped away of all of the Frank Miller bits, sort of.
the Frank Miller bits are the best part.
It's not Miller's Batman is not thematically consistent with the Batman that most of us know and love.
He is though. He created the grim dark Batman. Like that is, I don't know if the first instance. I'm not gonna say my Batman knowledge is that good, but like that Miller Batman is kind of a prototypical grim darky 90s Batman that
Yeah.
happened.
But he also uses a machine gun and kills criminals and stuff.
Doesn't
like
use
that.
a machine gun.
I'm pretty sure he uses a machine gun. In
What
Returns.
happens is he takes over Gotham from a group of gang members. Very similar to what happens in Rises, with a tank / Batmobile that fires, I think, like rubber pellets.
He fired. Yeah. Are you talking about the one in the comic? Because
Yeah.
that thing was gigantic.
Yeah, it was awesome as hell.
It was great. It's like the size of my house.
Yeah, I think it fired. I don't think it fires bullets, though. I don't think anyone dies.
I'm just saying, I distinctly remember a scene in that graphic novel where Batman does use a machine gun.
Positive. I have it somewhere. I don't think he uses a machine gun.
Do you really? I mean, come on. This is Frank Miller we're talking about.
It's Batman, though. He can't kill people, Mike. There is a story. I don't know if you've ever read it. It's not good, and most people haven't, called All-Star Batman and Robin.
I have not, but I've heard of it. It's infamous.
Yeah. I read it. What it is it's DC imprint, which called the All-Star kind of series. What they try to do is DC tried to harp on what Marvel did by making like a separate universe of stories.
Yeah, the Ultimate Comics, yeah.
And they came out with All-Star Batman and Robin.
Yeah, it's like some, because Frank Miller wanted to make Batman edgy,
Yeah, it was Frank Miller.
And yeah, exactly. Well, didn't I say that?
Yeah, you're right.
Okay. Well, I don't know why you corrected me when I said the right thing.
There are some podcast points for you.
That boom. I'm marking the list. I'm just gonna keep a running tally as soon as I find a paper and pen somewhere in this. It's the whole paperless office thing. This isn't really an office though. It's my room.
Why were we talking about All-Star Batman and Robin? Oh yeah, it's what happens when you try.
Because we hate ourselves.
It's what happens when you try to make Batman not who he is.
Sure. And Batman doesn't need to be edgy. Like, it's offensive as a Batman fan. Batman is already basically an unhinged sociopath whose only saving grace is the fact that he refuses to kill. Like, he's one step away from being the very criminals that he condemns.
Yeah.
And so he doesn't need to be any edgier. Like, Superman, Yeah, I could see them trying to make that grimmer, darker franchise because Superman is basically a Boy Scout, and that's really boring for audiences to watch.
It is.
You know, because Superman is, he has basically the powers of a god. He's a godlike entity who represents, has the best traits of humanity inside of him, and it's like, dude, that's so boring.
It's so boring.
You know?
I mean, it doesn't make anything interesting at all. It just reminds us of how terrible we are as people.
Sure, yeah, and that's why Zack Snyder felt the need to destroy an entire city in his Man of Steel film.
Yeah.
And that's why the most interesting, Superman story is All-Star Superman because he's dealing with his mortality.
I mean, there have been other, I think Alan Moore did maybe it was Gaiman, I can't remember. Somebody did another really interesting Superman story, but it had nothing to do with him picking up buildings or, fixing a city. It just had to do with his humanity. And, the fact that even though he's not human, even though he's not from Earth, he still has like a personality. He still has a humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Which was really interesting when I feel like they did that a little bit, tried to do that a little bit in Man of Steel when he was a kid and kind of going through, I guess, a metaphor to hormonal changes. And that was interesting. I mean, that showed a sign of him that, we never have gotten to see in the film tradition.
Yeah, I didn't mind the flashbacks. I didn't mind that it flashed back to the most important parts of his development.
Yeah, like there was a scene where he's a kid and he, I don't know, I think starts going through like his X-ray vision in the middle of class and becomes, too overwhelming for him. And I feel like, as a child, we've all gone through that social anxiety period. But seeing it filter through like Superman and his powers, he's got like powers, helped ground him in something that we can relate to, which is something that he's never been able to do. We can't relate to Superman.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And that sort of brings me to another defense that I'd like to make of Man of Steel, because I don't think it was a great movie, but I remember like one of the biggest complaints about the film when it came out was that, and this is a spoiler. Is it okay if I spoil this for you, Mike?
I think I deleted it already.
Okay, great. Well, spoiler alert, at the climax of the film, Superman kills...
What?
He kills, what's the bad guy's name? Jesus Christ.
Zod.
Zod, yes, he kills Zod. And a lot of people complained like, oh, this isn't Superman, Superman doesn't kill, and blah, blah, blah. But in the context of the movie and the universe that Snyder and Goyer established, it's completely consistent with Superman's character. If in Nolan's Batman universe, if Batman didn't have the no killing rule and then he killed the Joker, that would make it wouldn't be a problem.
Yeah.
In that universe, So I didn't have a problem with that personally. But then again, I've always thought Superman's pretty boring as a character, so yeah, whatever. Give me the action. Destroy the whole city. Have Lawrence Fishburne running away for no reason. Whatever, who cares?
I think I was fast-forwarding through that movie, and I'm like, wait, Lawrence Fishburne's in this? What the hell?
Yeah, he's I like him.
Yeah,
he's a good actor.
I think I stopped for a few months to see what was going on, and then I got bored again.
Sure, because you were like, oh my goodness, maybe he's an angry black guy like Blade in here. Because you're like, this movie could use some Blade in it.
Every movie can use a little bit of Blade in it.
Even romantic comedies?
I don't even know what that is. What's a romantic comedy?
It's something that you take a lady to and pretend to like.
Like A Fish Called Wanda? Is that one?
No idea. Like Wanda Sykes? I have no idea.
Fish Called Wanda. It's a movie film.
Oh, does it star Wanda Sykes?
It stars John Cleese.
So probably not. She's probably not in it then.
I don't think it has.
Not a lot of overlap. No. That raises a lot of questions. Why isn't she in a Tyler Perry movie? Why didn't she just play Medea? Like, she'd be a great Medea.
Wanda Sykes?
Like she's an actual woman. Yeah, why not?
I think it's because
Tyler Perry just really likes being in drag?
Which is interesting because Wanda Sykes is out as a lesbian. And I know that most of the black community probably didn't take that very well.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Because I filter it through the eyes of a suburban person who doesn't really care about that sort of thing. You don't really understand
most of the world around you.
Well, sure, exactly. I have a very closed-off worldview. But no, these celebrities, they come out years after anyone cares, like after they're relevant.
That's not true. I think Queen Latifah did. She's still kind of relevant.
In what way is Queen Latifah relevant?
She was in that one movie with Steve Martin recently.
Jesus Christ.
And by recently, I mean like 6 years ago.
10 years ago. Yeah, she was in Taxi with Jimmy Fallon like 10 years ago. And I'm sad that I know that movie. Like, I really am. Like, I'm a lot more depressed now than I was at the beginning of this podcast.
Who would outwardly, other than like an 18-year-old, you're the only other person who would outwardly admit they like Jimmy Fallon.
I didn't say I liked him. Okay,
you've implied it.
Don't put words in my mouth. We've gotten way off course here, as we approach the twilight hours of this podcast.
It seems like these recent Marvel films have been really super duper popular based on the fact that they've decided to do away with everything that makes comic books interesting, which has felt like a really kind of big slap in the face in that they use these characters, they use this history, but they decide to kind of shun away everything that makes the comic medium relevant and unique. You don't get any flavor from these movies. They're also bland. Like,
yes, that's a good way to put
unsalted cauliflower.
Or some nice unsalted saltines.
What's that? It's like bread?
Just a plain cracker. I think it's a communion wafer.
Yeah, that doesn't sound good. So I know that you maybe kind of understand or, kind of see the point, even though that you're not the largest fan of comic books, you're kind of more of a filmic buff, maybe?
Yeah, cinemaphile.
Yeah, whatever. You see the fact that these movies do have flaws, but you enjoy them, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I've seen most of the ones that we've discussed.
And what's interesting...
Whereas you've seen apparently none of them.
I've seen 3 of the... Yeah, 4 maybe. I've seen 4. Okay. Not counting the ones from the early 2000s. But what kind of really makes me the angriest, and the fact and the reason why I decided to rant this whole time, is that they're so popular, and yet I feel like they're such a waste of time for everyone watching them because of what they decide not to do with any of the characters at all.
And that's kind of where I take issue with you on that, because clearly you're a comic book fan first, and
that's fair.
Yeah, you really respect the material, the source material, but I mean, this is material, superheroes, demigods, things of that nature, world conquering villains. These things lend themselves very well to the summer blockbuster genre of film. So I don't think you can knock these films for being made in that template, because that's where they're going to make the most profit. Yes. It's where the most people are going to be entertained, and they're entertained. Most of them are entertaining. Even the Marvel Cinematic ones, I've knocked them for being bland. They're still like a fun time. I mean, would I like to see a Batman movie that's like a hard-boiled detective movie? Yeah, but it's not going to make $1 billion worldwide like The Dark Knight Rises.
It wouldn't make $1 billion. It would make $1 trillion, because that sounds awesome.
It does sound awesome. Like someone... I'll write that. Seriously. But you see my point, right?
Yeah, I mean, I understand that because, like, in a really large comic book series, the more action, the better sales it does. I mean, that's, basic business right there. You make it entertaining and more people will want to see it. But the really good comic book movies, for me, delve a little deeper, have a little depth to them, which I'm so disappointed by these recent Marvel movies that, man, they could have been so much better. That's my biggest fault, is that they could have been so much better.
And I will agree with you there. There's a lot of wasted potential there. Most of them are just build-ups to the Avengers films. Joss Whedon knows what he's doing. Favreau knew what he was doing with the first Iron Man, but besides that, a lot of these directors seem pretty visionless. I don't know if it's like Disney and Marvel, micromanaging them and saying we need this and that and we need it to look this way. But yeah, there's definitely a case of wasted potential with a lot of these superhero franchises.
Yeah, especially like Captain America in particular. Like, I feel like you can do a lot with that character.
And they didn't do much at all.
It was just a Nazi beat-em-up. Hydra beat-em-up.
Not real, like a Nazi subset.
Pretty sure it was Nazis.
Well, I mean, the rest of the war, the rest of the, soldiers were fighting Nazis, but Captain America, he was taking on Hydra.
Hydra guys.
And Agent Smith.
Don't know who that is. Oh, Agent.
Yeah, Hugo Weaving, man.
I think you will find his name is Elrond of Rivendell.
I think you'll find that this is going to be a Matrix podcast before it becomes a Lord of the Rings podcast.
I will fight you to the death to have this be a Lord of the Rings podcast.
That is a challenge that I accept, sir.
Thank you very much, and good night, everybody.
Good night. Wait a minute, boy. Where are you going?
I sang my number. I gave the show a little class. Now I'm off.